Hi, I'm Jasmine, the sequel, and I am not relatable. So finally, after much waiting, this is the second part in my 3-part Virgie Tovar series. So there is still one more to come. This is another very short video by her that took me forever to put together because of the amount of research that went into it. I only post 1 or 2 sources on my actual video, but I do look through a lot more to make sure that my opinion is correct. If I'm wrong about something, I go back, I cut it out, and it takes me a really long time. I wrote a script, I did the whole shebang. Okay, you guys, I did like a real YouTuber thing. I'm a grown-up YouTuber now. What I mean to say is the 3rd part might take me just as long, and so if it takes a little while, sorry, but I'd rather have it out late than do a poor job at it. You know what I mean? This is my 2nd part, like I said. And to date, my Virgie Tovar video has been, I think, my least watched video. If I cared about YouTube views or stuff like that, I probably wouldn't make another part of it. But the fact of the matter is that I actually really care about this topic. It's personally very important to me. And I will try and do my best to review this in an open and concise manner as I can with as much information as I can possibly give you. But I'll be very honest, I do not like Virgie Tovar. I find her to be very disingenuous, and I find her to be very closed-minded for an activist. And last but not least, I think she's doing the people who listen to her a very severe disservice. Most of the people who listen to her are in their early 20s or teens, or maybe even their late 20s, but most of them, are not in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. It's when you start getting into those ages that you really start seeing the effect of morbid obesity on your body. And the fact that she never once talks about that very much so upsets me.
Hi, I'm Virgie Tovar, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about how body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers. Specifically, how being fat affects these things. People of all sizes tend to report a dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people tend to have less access to meaningful participation in society. Most people believe that discriminating against fat people isn't discrimination at all. Sometimes we don't even realize how our implicit bias affects the ways we view the world around us. For example, is it possible that you would believe me or imagine me a qualified expert if I were 250 pounds instead of the size I am now? Let's see. Hi, I'm Virgie Tovar.
I'm really unsure what the point of this stunt was. If I've missed something, please do let me know. Because when I watched this, the only thing I thought was, okay, and just because I'm involved in this, I thought maybe my perception of it is skewed. I should get an outside neutral observer. So I had a friend watch it and give me her first opinion. And her thought was, okay. And she made a very good point, my friend, in that if you came to see a talk on this subject, you would not be someone who would hate fat people. And I don't genuinely think that's true. I think there are definitely trolls out there who hate fat people just from the offset. But most people don't hate fat people. I think most people have some incorrect notions about fat people, but I think most people just don't want to be fat themselves. And I don't think that those two things are the same. You can be perfectly fine with fat people and still not want that for yourself.
And I'm here tonight to talk to you about the ways that body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers, in particular, how being fat affects these things. People of all sizes tend to report dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people actually have less access to meaningful participation in society. Most people believe that discrimination against fat people isn't discrimination at all. Sometimes it's difficult to see how implicit bias shapes the way we see the world around us. For example, is it possible that you are less likely to believe me or imagine me as a trained professional or an expert now that you know that I'm the real Virgie Tovar?
I would agree. I agree with the fact that obese people don't have as much say in society as other groups do. Now, the why of that is the important fact here, right? Why don't they have as much say in society as other groups do? And that is the only way we will be able to find a quote unquote solution to this problem. Simply stating that there is a problem, I don't think is enough, especially for an activist. The reason why fat people don't have as much say in society is because of multiple reasons. Let's look at voting for one. Now, a study that was conducted in 2001 by Blakely, Kennedy, and Kawachi found that the probability of voting was 2.2 times higher in people who were well educated than in people who were less educated and in a lower socioeconomic status. A study of the 2017 Czech elections found that the probability of voting decreased the further the polling station was from where you lived. That might not seem like a huge issue just on its surface, but it can be if you are morbidly obese. Walking can be a significant challenge. And if vote by mail is not available to you, you might think to yourself, well, this is not worth it. I can't go and stand hours and hours and hours in line. I can't go and walk, the 1 mile maybe that it might be to a polling station if they don't have the use of a car or a public service available to them. So that can definitely impact turnout for that population. Sorry about this, guys. The audio got a little bit messed up and I had to cut that part out. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to look at this still while I finish what I was trying to say. If education amongst the obese population is lower than the education amongst other populations, we can make a pretty strong inference that unfortunately they're going to end up holding jobs that are going to make it difficult for them to take time off, for them to take the day off essentially to go vote, which is what's required in America. And coupled with that, if they don't have the ability to stand in lines for a long period of times, they might not have the ability to vote at all, thus reducing their overall turnout and thus reducing their probability of enacting any serious legislative changes through elected officials. Well, then maybe Virgie Tovar meant in terms of employment, right? That can be another avenue in which fat people can have their voices diminished. A 2016 study found that that was actually very true. People who weighed more tended to be discriminated against in the workforce. But why? Why did they tend to be discriminated against? I would say that as someone who's been part of the hiring process before, who's had to assess a person's capabilities and skills, I think judging their physical capabilities is a very fair point. If I had a candidate come in for a job that required heavy lifting, but they themselves were extremely out of shape, I would doubt whether or not they could do that. If I had another person come in, same experience, same background, same everything, but they were not in poor health and seemed like they'd be capable of lifting the heavy weights that they were asked to, I'd be more inclined to hire the person who I thought could do that job. Now, is that discrimination? No, because if I chose not to hire someone on the basis of education, say because they didn't have as much education, they didn't have as much experience, they didn't have the right kind of understanding, none of that would be considered discrimination. So physically not being able to perform a task, I think, is a valid reason to not hire someone. The study also stated that obese people were perceived as being less leadership material than their normal weight counterparts. Now, that is definitely a problem. Once more, I will never come out and say that fat phobia is not a thing. I just don't think that it is as prevalent as Virgie Tovar believes it to be. And more importantly, we don't know how being perceived as lack of leadership material impacts the future earnings of an individual. We just don't have that data. So to make an inference based on nothing, I don't think is also fair. So there's two more avenues that Virgie Tovar could be talking about. One could be in terms of social outings and the last could be in terms of the media. Now, when it comes to social outings, I can understand what she means, right? It can be harder if you're morbidly obese to get around. Cars sometimes can't comfortably accommodate you. You might not be able to sit in a movie theater, or you couldn't sit in a booth if you wanted to at a restaurant. All of those things are fair, but my question to you would be, would it be fair to have seating that would accommodate people of that size? Because then what you would end up doing is creating a fat people section, which I think would also make them feel discriminated against. Well, maybe the solution here could be that we get rid of all seating that is not going to accommodate people who are, say, 400 pounds. But what about people who are 600 pounds? What about people who are 800 pounds? Well, maybe we only have seats that can accommodate 800-pound people or more, right? And we don't have seats that wouldn't accommodate them at all. But to have seats that large and have seating areas that are that large would severely reduce the number of people that could fit in a restaurant. That hurts their bottom line. So to make the same amount of profit, or even just to break even, they would have to charge significantly more. And you know who that would hurt? People who are in a lower socioeconomic status. So I can understand why people who are fat would feel that way, but at the same time, I can't help but feel that it sucks, though this is a situation you can change. Being poor, being in a lower socioeconomic status, no one wants that. They just can't help it. And as for the media, well, we have models like Tess Holliday. We have very public speakers like Virgie Tovar and Sonali Rajatwar. And I think that they're making a lot of gains. And quite frankly, it's a little bit alarming. Now, there are a lot of plus size models, but those are women who are naturally curvy. Virgie Tovar, Tess Holliday, Sonali Rajatwar, they are morbidly obese. There is a huge difference between the two. And still, there is that representation. They're still there in the mainstream. So when you come out and you say, well, there's no representation, I don't agree with you. I would say there's far less representation for, say, Arab women in the media. There's far less representation for, say, Indian Pakistani women in the media. There's far less representation of queer people of color in the media. I just can't agree with you. I'm sorry.
While you think about that, I want to tell you a story. I want you to imagine me at 4 years old. My favorite part of the day was when we got home from running errands or from preschool. I would push open the front door with both small hands and I would take off running through the living room, through the hallway, past my bedroom, past the washer dryer that made funny sounds that I liked, and into the bathroom. I would take off all my clothes, wiggling out of my pants, nearly ripping my way out of my t-shirt like it was an inconvenient membrane. I would leave my clothes in a pile on the floor and I would take off back towards the kitchen where my grandmother was always cooking. When I reached the end of the hallway where the calico cat-colored rug turned into the linoleum of the hallway, rather of the dining room, I would stop. I would spread out my arms and legs as far as I could and I would jiggle. My thighs and belly, my cheeks would wobble, my entire body would undulate like the water in the bathtub or like at the community pool that I love so much in the summer. My body was like that water, a source of relief and fun, a place I could jump into and feel held. It felt good. Oh, it felt so good. I think back on that story now and I can barely believe that it's my own. It feels so far away. I feel protective of that little girl who could not have imagined the horrible education and body shame that was awaiting her. Less than a year later, those jiggle-filled afternoons would disappear. I would enter kindergarten and the kids in my class would teach me the lessons that they had learned about bodies from the culture. My native relationship to my body would be stolen from me, and in its place would grow one toxic idea: your body is wrong. That idea would threaten my happiness and ultimately my health for the next nearly 2 decades. It turns out that my story, even the timing of the events, were part of a bigger cultural narrative. Researchers have found that very young U.S. children show an understanding that fatness should be avoided at pretty much any cost. In fact, they asked a group of 5-year-olds if they would rather lose an arm or be fat, and they chose losing an arm.
Here's the thing. I'm sorry that Virgie Tovar had to experience that. That is not a fun thing for anybody to experience. Everybody feels self-conscious, and the fact that she had to go through that must have been extremely tough. But I would just like to say that it's not just her, and more importantly, it's not just weight. I I have Middle Eastern blood in me. And so I get a little bit of a mustache. I don't have a unibrow, but that's because my eyebrows are very, very scarce. But I do get a unibrow. Sorry. I don't get a unibrow, but I have a mustache. I get a little mustache sometimes. I like to call him Jake. I, was teased about it very extensively during middle school and high school. It was something that made me feel very self-conscious. And yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have done it, but I also understand that in retrospect, as much as it might have sucked back then, kids unfortunately suck, especially middle school kids. They will look for the one thing that is different in someone and they'll pick on it. And as much as I wish we could appeal to their better natures, kids are a little bit like little sociopaths at that age. It's one of the reasons why you can't diagnose a lot of personality disorders until they've grown out of their teen years. They generally just tend to fluctuate very, very wildly. Should we try and teach them to be better anyway? Of course we should. But to say that they robbed you of your native relationship to your body is pinning a lot on children. And by the way, this study that she's talking about with the 5-year-old children, I looked everywhere and I cannot find it. If any one of you finds it, please do let me know because I like to do my research. All I could come up with was a Reddit thread that talked about this, and in the Reddit thread, it mentioned that this was actually an interview on 2020 conducted by a Naomi Campbell in 1995, and I couldn't find the clip of it anywhere.
I was not unlike those 5-year-olds. I too believe that I should do anything in my power to change my body because I'd been taught that people like me were ugly and inferior, that my fatness was an external manifestation of internal monstrosity. Even though I hated dieting, I did it for nearly 20 years because I believed I had to lose weight if I wanted love, success, visibility, and freedom. I believed that life would begin later. I would wear a bathing suit later. I would go on a date later. I would wear my favorite outfit. I would travel later.
She talks about how diminished she felt, and that is truly very sad. I do feel for her there because I myself have been there, right? I can very much so empathize with her. No one should ever feel diminished or saddened or hurt because of their weight. Everybody deserves to live happily and free and comfortably in their skin, no matter what. That said, you cannot pretend that having a ton of excess weight on your body does not impair your ability to live that very happy, healthy life. Maybe not healthy, but even just a happy life that Virgie claims that she wants. There's this trail I want to do. It is a shortened version of the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. It is 7 miles, 2,000 feet elevation gain. It is pretty hard. Maybe not for experienced hikers, but for me, it would be pretty hard. And I understand that, it will be tough. I will have to train myself. I will have to lose more weight than I am carrying right now to make sure that it's a comfortable and enjoyable experience. Can somebody who is morbidly obese do that? I don't think so. And it's not a matter of, do I think they're physically capable? It's not a matter of, do I think they're mentally capable of it or that they shouldn't. I don't think they can physically safely do that. Things like that can become a real challenge in your life and they can limit what you can do. And all of a sudden, the only options you have to choose for are the options that your body will allow you to. For me, and for a lot of people who are at a lower weight than I even, they have everything available to them. Every option is available to them. But for someone who is morbidly obese, their weight physically keeps them from doing things that they might otherwise enjoy. It's not even just that as a consideration. Can you afford to fly there? You might need a first class seat, or you might need to book 2 seats. A flight to Peru could be too expensive for you. That can also be a limiting factor, and it's directly correlated with your weight. Would you be comfortable in going? No one should feel like their appearance is the reason that they cannot live their life to the fullest. That being said, you shouldn't let that trick you. You shouldn't let the confidence in your appearance trick you into thinking that you are living your best life, when in reality, the only part of you that's living its best life is the fat on you.
The history of dieting is much older than most people realize. The grandfather of modern-day dieting was named Reverend Sylvester Graham. He rose to prominence in the 1800s and is now known for his namesake invention, the graham cracker. Graham believed that delicious, well-spiced foods led to lasciviousness, and that low-flavor, low-fat foods led to purity of mind and body. He started the dietary reform movement. He and his followers believed that through food, you could control morality.
So, Sylvester Graham, I'm going to read my notes here if you guys don't mind, because there's a lot of history here. I don't want to get the names wrong, and I don't have any kind of teleprompter situation, so I've got my notes down here. So Sylvester Graham is actually known as the original father of the vegan vegetarian movement in America, along with two other men. The names of those two men are William Metcalf and Dr. William Alcott. And even with his limited science back then, he still came to the correct conclusion that veganism/vegetarianism was the most healthy way to live. Now, there are ways that you can do it that it would be unhealthy, but there is no denying that the science fundamentally agrees on the fact that cutting out most animal products from your diet would actually ensure that you live a longer, healthier, more fulfilling life. Physically, emotionally, completely separate ballgame. Now, Graham's focus was not, of course, on the ethics of veganism or vegetarianism. It was on purity. Essentially, what he wanted to do was, through diet, keep people pure so they didn't have bad thoughts and they were good Christian people. He wasn't entirely wrong. His focus on purity stemmed actually from the very simple fact that back then, a lot of flour was processed in such a way that it would stay fresher looking for longer, even when it was starting to slightly go off. He urged people to make homemade bread and to use coarsely ground wheat to do so. And he believed that eating pure in this way would keep your soul pure as well. I'm not entirely surprised. He was a preacher from the 1800s, so purity was kind of their shtick. But what's curious about this is why she chose Sylvester Graham and not, say, Dr. William Alcott. Could it be that, much like his contemporaries today, he too believed that excess weight on your body was not a good thing? What Reverend Graham believed was what you could describe as best today as a fad diet. In fact, he's known as the first fad dieter. And no one here is proposing that people go on fad diets. Most people, when they talk about dieting, they're using it in a very loose term. They're using it as a replacement for sustainable weight loss on a regimented eating plan. Now, you can call that a lifestyle change, you can call it a diet, you can call it whatever you want. But fundamentally, most people want to make small changes that will lead up to great results and a better future for you. And I know people are going to climb out of the woodworks and say, well, dieting is not sustainable. 95% of people who lose weight gain it all back. All of that information is based on a study conducted on hospitalized individuals who are morbidly obese. People who are not in the morbidly obese category doing small changes at home by themselves and slowly losing the weight over a prolonged period of time, I'm sorry, but it just isn't as studied as we would like it to be. So no, I don't agree with you. I personally believe that doing it slowly and effectively is the best way. Doing it slowly and progressively is the best way to go. And I think that that's the best way to keep the weight off as well. Learning moderation, learning to eat everything, just not to excess, learning to understand the way your body functions on the inside, and addressing the emotional problems that might come with problematic eating patterns.
The same ideological basis of dieting today. Dieting was there during every formative step of my life. I was starving myself for the first time in the summer before elementary school. I was on a diet the day I graduated from high school. I had my first bout of hunger-induced exhaustion when I was overseas in college for the first time. And when I got my BA in political science, I was calorie counting the meal following the ceremony. It never once occurred to me that maybe the problem wasn't me. Maybe there was something not quite right about a culture that hated me so much just because I was bigger than other people. I never thought to blame fat phobia, the bigotry ideology that positions fat people as inferior. I only ever blamed myself. It wasn't until I began researching fat in graduate school that my ideas about all of this began to change. It was 2010, and fat studies was an emerging discipline with only a handful of books and articles. It was in this fledgling environment that I began interviewing women who had been fat their whole lives. I wanted to understand how their body size had affected the trajectory of their lives. I found that no matter what I asked them in interviews, the stories kept coming back to clothing, gender, alienation.
Moderation and reasonable eating are not sexy, but unfortunately they are effective, and so we do need to study them more. They might not make a splash, but I really do believe this is the only way that we might be able to address the obesity epidemic that a lot of the Western world is facing right now. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I want to say this to everybody. Anecdotes are not evidence. They just aren't. It is, honest to goodness, the weakest form of evidence that you could provide for any argument. And for Virgie Tovar to stand there on a stage provided by TEDx with their credibility behind her and to state such stuff like this is very, very misleading, and quite frankly, it's upsetting.
In 2014, not long after that poolside moment, I started a campaign called Lose Hate, Not Weight. I wanted to tell people that it was not weight that needed to be shed, but rather the ideology that we aren't perfect no matter what our size.
This is the reason why I wanted to make this video. This hashtag, lose hate, not weight. Look, I agree with a lot of the sentiments that she talks about, right? I think you are worthy of love and respect and all the good things in life, regardless of what weight you are. But that does not mean that I will go as far as to co-signing unhealthy behavior, which is what Virgie Tovar here is asking me to do. I'm sorry, but I can't, and neither should anybody else. If you are eating 3 times the amount of saturated fat and salt and just ultra-processed, very highly palatable foods every day, your loved ones should say something to you. I'm not saying call you a fatty, but sitting you down and having a conversation about why you feel the need to eat in this manner, I think is a good thing. I think you should do that. And you're doing it out of a place of love and care for that person. If I had someone in my life who was eating to excess every single day, I would worry about how long they have to live. And I would talk to them about it. I would want to do something about it. Losing body parts because of uncontrolled diabetes is something that's avoidable. And if I worried that someone in my family or someone in my life was heading down that path, I would talk to them about it. Worrying for someone's early death is not fatphobic. It's just not. That's what love is. My mom calls me every single day when I get home from work to make sure I got home okay. She's not car phobic. She just loves me. Once more, it's not fatphobic. It's not concern trolling when it comes from people who love you, people in your life who see you every single day. It's just love. It's just wanting better for you. That's all it is. And honestly, this right here is the crux of the problem that I have with Virgie Tovar. It's one of the major reasons I created my channel, along with Foodie Beauty's racist rants. Her dismissive attitude towards people who do want to lose weight, especially for those people who want to lose weight for medical reasons, I think needs to be addressed by more people and at greater length.
I began to solicit submissions from women. I wanted to understand women who had declared peace in their relationship on their body, women who had stopped trying to control their weight. One of the first stories I got was from a woman named Abby. Abby started to have excruciating uterine cramps in her 20s, and she tried to ignore it, but ended up at the hospital, and her doctor took one look at her, saw a fat person, and rather than examine her, told her that she simply needed to lose weight, and the pain would go away. Even though Abby sensed that there was something more serious happening inside, she didn't feel empowered to speak back to the doctor. So she left, and she didn't return to another doctor for 3 years. And during those 3 years, a tumor grew inside of her, unmonitored and undetected. She spent most of her 20s in treatment for cancer, and she told me that the language that she heard about cancer, that it was an invasive alien force that had taken over her body, reminded her of the way that people had talked about her fatness. And through making peace with cancer, she was able to make peace with her body.
This story is why her hashtag is so incredibly damaging. Uterine cancer is so much more prominent. It's 57% more likely to occur in morbidly obese women than it is to occur in normal, healthy weight women. And on top of that, 10% of those women are going to be considered inoperable due to their weight. Your story is great. awesome, but you are literally damning them to a path in which they're much more likely to have this cancer and be significantly less likely to be diagnosed for it. Fundamentally, even if Abby's doctor had taken her seriously, there is no reason to assume that she would have been diagnosed. If she was too heavy to fit inside of an MRI machine or a CT scan machine, then what is the doctor supposed to do? Unfortunately, a lot of times doctors have to rely on less efficient therapeutic and diagnostic measures because a person's morbid obesity keeps them from using the regular standard operating procedure tactics. Even an ultrasound is less effective on people who have a lot of body fat on them. These machines simply have a much harder time performing. Now, if your solution is, well, just make them bigger, make them able to accommodate people, that requires a lot more work. And machines like these are very sensitive. They're not calibrated. They're not making them specifically only for thin people. A lot of these machines only operate well because of the shape and size in which they come. There are machines that can accommodate people who are significantly larger. There is an MRI machine in particular that can do that. Unfortunately, because it can accommodate larger people, it loses a lot of the clarity that a regular MRI machine would have. That clarity can be the difference between life and death in a cancer patient. So what is our solution here? Well, if for Abby, she might have required, if you are morbidly obese like Abby in her story, you would require a great clinician, something that's not guaranteed, especially not in rural and distant communities. And you might require exploratory surgery, something that is significantly more dangerous if you are carrying a lot more weight, especially if you are someone who carries a lot of their weight in front. That can impact your breathing, and with anesthesia, you can have very dire results. So no, your advice will only produce more Abbies, not less of them. You are giving all the reasons why people should not listen to you. And just on a completely side note, I want to flag the fact that Virgie herself compared obesity to cancer. That's not me. I think her description is very apt, but I just want to make it clear, not me. That was all her.
Abby is now in remission. One of my favorite stories came from a woman named Erin. Erin was in a terrible car accident when she was in college. A truck came over the dividing line, hit her head on, and totaled her car. She had to be removed with the jaws of life and helicoptered to the nearest hospital. Even though nearly every inch of her body was covered in lacerations and bruises, her internal organs were perfectly intact. Her doctor told her that if she hadn't been carrying a little extra weight, she would have definitely died. She said to me, "It's pretty hard to hate your body after something like that."
This story is a statistical anomaly. It just is. I did a lot of research. I'm going to throw all of the information up on the screen. If I can, you can pause and read it. They're also all going to be linked down below. But by far and large, morbidly obese people tend to wear their seatbelts a lot less, mostly because it's uncomfortable. And when they're in an accident, they're much, much more likely to be fatally injured and die than people of a normal weight. So I'm really glad that this person did so well, but it's a statistical anomaly and it means nothing.
Erin is now a well-known burlesque star in Seattle. I want to leave you with one last story. And it's one that occurred recently in November. I took a group of women to Jamaica. And every single morning, we would walk out to the edge of the Caribbean Sea. We would spread out our arms and legs as far as we could, and we would jiggle. The experience released something inside of us, the remembrance of freedom, the remembrance and the connection to ourselves as magical, the idea that our bodies are these incredible vehicles that take us through the most meaningful parts of our lives. So I want to leave you with the sentiment that you shouldn't wait one more day, one more pound. The next time that you look in the mirror and you have the impulse to judge the body you see, or you look at another person and have the impulse to judge their body, remember that childlike sense of wonder. After all, you have nothing to lose but your shame. Thank you.
So here's the thing. She's both right and not in this particular situation, right? I'm really happy for all of these women. I'm really happy they were able to go on this trip. Seriously. Human beings are not just brains in a meat suit. Our bodies are who we are, and we are who our bodies are. We are a complete package. It's not, a brain plus, as it were. That's why weight loss isn't just thermodynamics, right? There's a lot more interconnectedness between the two. That being said, how many women and men will not be able to go on this trip because they couldn't afford 2 seats? How many of them are housebound? How many of them are bedbound? How many of them are waiting surgeries that they can't get because of their weight? How many of them never even got the chance to choose because they died from complications of morbid obesity? So that was the video. I hope it wasn't too incoherent. I've tried my best. I really need a teleprompter, especially for stuff like this. A lot of the studies I would love to be able to rattle off at the top of my head, but my memory is really pretty shoddy. And if I look down at my notes the whole time, this video is going to feel so much longer. I just want to end this by saying that I don't like Virgie Tovar. It's got nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with who she is as a activist and what she represents and how she presents things. I think she does what in 1984 is referred to as double speech. She says one thing, she implies another. She talks about how you can be morbidly obese and still be perfectly healthy, never acknowledging the fact that that state of healthiness is almost always temporary. She never acknowledges what happens when you age past your 25 or 30-year mark, what happens to your knees, and what happens to people who become bedbound, who become housebound, who, for lack of a better term, basically only live to eat. She doesn't want to talk about any of that because the ugly truth of it is that is what morbid obesity is. It is not the image that Virgie Tovar presents on that stage wearing her beautiful yellow outfit. It just isn't. And I'm sorry, and I wish I had more answers, but believing in a lie isn't going to fix this. Real weight loss, the sustainable, guilt-free kind, is possible. You might need an entire team of people, but I do believe it can be done. It just requires a lot of soul searching and a lot of personal work too. And I don't think a lot of people want to do that. I don't think they want to be uncomfortable for that long, but that's what it's going to take. Anyway, that will be it from me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you hated it. If there were things that I could have done better or that I could have improved on, please do let me know down below. Leave me a comment if there's any other person that you'd like me to talk about, if there's any other topics you'd like me to cover. Like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications on your way out if you'd like to. I've linked my social medias down below. So I've got my Twitter, where I pop off sometimes. I've got my Instagram, where I mostly just put food-related content from me, my recipes and things like that, and just what's happening with me personally. And I've got my Patreon. I think of Patreon as kind of like the tip jar for the internet. If you want to throw a few bucks in there, I would really appreciate it. But please don't feel obligated in any circumstances. And as always, I'm Jasmine, the sequel. And I am not relatable. Peace.